Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Professor StJohn Crean. I'm the Vice-Chancellor for Research and Enterprise here at the University of Lancashire. And welcome to the latest episode in this podcast series for the Research and Knowledge Exchange Festival. These podcasts are designed to showcase some of the latest research, innovations, and practices from across the Research and Knowledge Exchange community, themed mainly around transforming lives and creating prosperity for Lancashire, the UK, and beyond. I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by three colleagues. Paresh Parmar, who's the Associate Dean in the School of Arts and Media for Research and Knowledge Exchange, Professor Niki Alsford, who's our Professor of Anthropology and Human Geography, and Dr. Yvonne Reddick, who is a reader in English literature and creative writing, who are here, all three of them, to discuss the incredible work they're doing in one of our strongest areas of activity in the research and knowledge exchange community, which is culture and creativity. So, Paresh, if I could start with you, I'd be very grateful if you could tell the audience a little bit about your university research and knowledge exchange activities. You have oversight of a school as well, so you can bring in any of the school activities that you feel relevant, particularly in those areas of arts, creativity and culture.
Thank you, StJohn. Yeah, as you know, I'm Paresh. I am one of the directors of the Global Sound Movement, and the Global Sound Movement are a collective of sound archivists. So what we do is we find communities that have instruments, we look at environments that are changing, and we record those sounds. And what we do with those sounds is we digitise those, and we make those accessible for other people to use. So what we're doing is we're keeping the prosperity of those sounds, we're keeping those sounds alive so other people can use them. And it helps us remember those sounds and enables us to use those in modern day music or in modern practices as well. We've covered a fair bit of ground, so over the period of time, we've covered such a large piece of ground that we've been able to put a piece of music together with instruments from all around the world that couldn't ordinarily be composed. And that piece of music is
incredible.
Yeah, it's been quite a challenge, but yeah, the team have managed to pull that together. And that piece of music will sit on a capsule that's going to be released into outer space and sit on the moon. And then in 2032 or 35, when they make a decision on the date, will be launched to interstellar, to outside out of our solar system.
To communicate with extraterrestrial
it's going to
worlds,
be,
I presume.
It's going to be a capture of human sound available from Earth. So if someone ever finds it, they'll get an idea of what it sounded like on Earth.
I can imagine future historians, let's call them, looking at us now, will look at this as a source of incredible signatures of what life has been and what life was and is like for us now. And it's going to fuel a lot of context, I would have thought, as a primary research source.
Of course, yeah. And it'll give you an insight of the various communities and habitats that existed.
Across the rest of the school, I know you've got an incredible portfolio of activity going on there. What would you highlight perhaps for the audience to entice them to attend the Research and Knowledge Exchange Festival?
The school itself are a great community of researchers, so they all work together really well. We have an enormous amount of resource, and one of the things that we would always encourage people to do is come and have a look at our resources, understand the research that's available. We start extending our access to research and to resource at a really young age. So we've started something called the YCC, the Young Creative Centre, and that enables students between the ages of 13 and 16 to engage with the arts. We cast that net quite wide, so it's open to schools within a 40-mile radius.
Wow.
And then they interact with our members of staff, with various practices and various resources that the university have.
Yeah, I'm always really impressed by the work that's going on in the unit, and I always look at it beyond its place that you've created in the school, because of course, and it applies to all three of my guests today, but the goodwill feeling one gets, or the feeling of well-being one gets from being present in creativity or art and culture, has effects well beyond the visible or audible. In some of the case, it has a significant well-being effect, doesn't it?
Of course, yeah. We've got a project called Wanna Dance that's helping people with Parkinson's. So taking, the element of dance or performance into the realm of aiding medical issues, and it does solve a
I've
complex
seen
problem,
some of that project. It's just extraordinary. Mm-hmm. The benefits to the participants. They almost, to hackney a phrase, they come alive, don't they? They awaken, very much like the eponymous film Awakenings, which was a similar story. Paresh, I think it's fantastic work, and I'm always put in mind of the language one hears from governments and funding agencies is all about science and skills, and that it's a shame that the culture and arts and media arena doesn't get the same language support.
No, and I don't think there's enough ground to be given for the transferable skills that are to be gained. There is a problem-solving culture in the creative industries. We are, starters of new businesses. We're solving problems in lots of different ways, and we just need enough room to breathe to carry on doing what we do.
I agree. The problem-solving skills are incredible. Thank you. Niki, if I could come to you next. You're from the School of Psychology and Humanities. Can you tell us a little bit about the incredible research you're involved with?
Yeah, sure. So my work essentially kind of sits at this intersection of environmental science and traditional ecological knowledge. And at the heart of this is an understanding about how people communicate and make sense of changes within their natural environment. To do this, I use intuition as a framework to understand those changes. So to give an example of this, I've been conducting fieldwork in Jeju, South Korea, since 2018. And here I work with the Haenyeo, which are female free-diving sea women. The oldest within the cohort that I work with is 84.
A youngster.
Very, very much so. And the youngest is 46. So the ethnographic kind of side of the work really is looking at how they have observed change over the times that they've been diving. So, for example, the 84-year-old has been diving since she was 13. So that observed change has happened over an extended period. So the way in which I look at that is within linguistic registers. So the other part kind of started in 2024, where I was down with the divers to do a 10 meter by 10 meter 3D model of the reef. This hadn't been done previously, so what we have got is this baseline survey to which that we can now observe the change whilst having the data that is coming from the women themselves. So it's a framework which I've been referring to as this like two-eyed seeing framework. And the key thing here really for me is to see how that methodology can be replicated across climate extremes. So last year I had the opportunity to do fieldwork in Mount Hagen in Papua New Guinea amongst the Huli tribesmen and their particular coffee growers. So similarly, I used 3D agroforestry modelling to look at the kind of layered ecosystems, and I observe very similar ways of communicating changes amongst very different groups of people, but at different extremes, one being quite high altitude and low altitude being under the sea. So I was kind of curious to see whether or not that we could look at similar observations if we moved into more climatic extremes, like up into the Arctic Circle. So last year I was with the Sami reindeer herders and looking at whether these observed changes across kind of ecological corridors. So one area that we're looking at doing now is to 3D map that landscape by using the data from the reindeer themselves. So we're kind of going through that as part of the project itself. The observation I did was to talk to the Sami around kind of snow level changes, ice crust formations, and a big thing for them is about vegetation availability and about how that's been retreating over the years. So this again is feeding into those kind of linguistic registers.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You make Indiana Jones sound lazy.
Not destructive. I'm not destructive.
No, okay. You don't get paid as much as he does.
Indeed, yeah.
That's fabulous. And there are two things to observe. I would have thought we did a similar podcast yesterday with the One Health, which is this combination of human health and animal health, but of course the environment being the link between the two. And it's just a demonstration of how we have great overlap within various areas. And again, we'll come back to the well-being and health thing. I will come back to the health and well-being event. But I just want the audience to have a feel for the fact that whilst your work is international, globally international, you are trying to bring those methodologies and let's say lessons learned into the Lancashire ecosystem. And you're working with several of the rivers trusts in our region. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's actually a very kind of interesting step for me. So my work with the Rivers Trust essentially is feeding into that bigger project. So I'm keen to kind of develop the science here, the environmental science here a bit further. So my observations in other settings have largely been visual. So these have been visual observations. And this is transferable along the different river catchments. However, I'm trying to add, and this is interesting here, is to add an acoustic element to this. So one of the observations that I had made whilst diving is that reefs are really noisy. And changes in those levels may indicate the health of a reef.
Yeah, of course.
But the snapping shrimp is actually something that exists on the river, the Ribble estuary. So the idea would be is to look at doing a similar project with a 3D mapping, but to do it with measuring sound. Another area, and this is a bit of a kind of a personal interest for me, is around earthworms. And earthworms may also make a lot of noise, but they are signals of healthy soil. So working with farming communities within Lancashire and putting these devices, which are already produced. Mm-hmm. I have a colleague that already works with a number of different kind of organic farming around listening to the sounds of worms, about ways in which that we could then be incorporating that into the project. But I suppose perhaps kind of this real kind of idea, this big grand idea that I have of working potentially with the Rivers Trust is a proposed idea of the use of drones to collect environmental DNA. The idea with this is that, of course, sending up drones to look at landscape is something that's already being done, but to collect eDNA requires some sort of robotic arm attached to the drone that can collect the DNA itself. Now, obviously, my background is not in engineering, so I have the thoughts, but they're, working across the university are ways in which that perhaps we could make that real. Now, that in turn could be learned here, but I could take with me abroad. So look at canopy measurements of eDNA high up in the canopy within the rainforest in Papua New Guinea, or following the reindeer herd in Norway. But I think it's really something interesting that we can do, because we can measure the movements of species along ecological corridors. And of course the rivers are a natural ecological corridors. We can see what species are moving, when they're moving, and are they changing over time. So a key thing for me here is to create this robotic
truly transferable research.
We could help you record that, and you're not even disturbing the environment.
Yeah, that would be brilliant.
I mean, it is an interesting lesson, because healthy soil has been associated with the presence of worms. You're actually talking about the noise the worms make.
Yeah, to help identify that
how healthy it really is. Fabulous. So Yvonne, to you, welcome. You're from a different arm of the university's academic arena. Just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
I am reader in English literature and creative writing. I'm an environmental humanities scholar, so I work on the intersection between the arts and culture and environmental issues, and I cut my teeth studying the work of authors who are also environmental activists, lobbying politicians and getting involved in bogland conservation and cleaning up the rivers, and actually being very, very active in those arenas. I'm also a writer and filmmaker, so I publish poetry, fiction and non-fiction, And I have a brilliant collaborator who is a neurobiologist by training turned freelance wildlife documentary filmmaker. And this is a dream collaboration for me, and I've hugely enjoyed working with him.
And you, on the back of this incredible portfolio that you've created and continues to grow, you've been overseas to California. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I received a Leverhulme Trust International Fellowship to go to UCLA in Los Angeles. And it took some time to get the funding bid right. It took 3 tries, and third time lucky it was successful.
They finally recognise your quality.
Thank you, but it's also my collaborators' quality and the fit with my collaborators over in the US. So UCLA have an Institute for Environment and Sustainability, and they're doing absolutely phenomenal cutting-edge work. The director works on how the winds and the climatic conditions escalate the fire risk in some of the local mountains. And this is absolutely brilliant, a key applied research, because both national park wildfires out in the countryside, and urban wildfires are a huge problem in California at the moment. But increasingly, we are seeing escalating issues with wildfire worldwide.
Yes,
they seem to be breaking out all over, and of course, climate change is increasing the risk. And what is quite interesting as well is that where Alex, my filmmaker collaborator, and I were filming at Sequoia National Park, to get there you have to go right through a huge oil field. So you are surrounded by pump jacks pumping out fossil fuels. California is a very wealthy state. It has its own natural resources. And then you see the impacts of fossil fuel burning in terms of climate change, both on the fringes of urban areas, and you see them in the national parks as well. So all the evidence of climate change and its source was right there in front of our eyes. So Alex, my filmmaker collaborator, and I went out to Sequoia National Park, and what we wanted to film was how animals and plants are adapting to the aftermath of wildfires. How do creatures and plants survive when these blazes are becoming increasingly severe? And this has a very obvious impact on human life as well, because Sequoia National Park has General Sherman, the world's largest tree. If you think about the size and girth of the tree, it is the world's biggest tree. And some of these ancient sequoias have had to be protected during the most severe wildfires because, of course, they are extremely culturally important for Indigenous people, for Californians, and for people who come from all over the world to see them. And we captured some really beautiful footage. There was a mother bear who came out of hibernation with her cub, and she and the cub were feeding in Crescent Meadows. And, people would gather right on the edge of the meadow, still in the cover of the trees, so they were respectful, but they would just look at this black bear in front of them going.
Extraordinary.
It was amazing.
Your passion, all three of you, comes through quite clearly, and your ability to capture those images in written word, of course, is a talent I envy you, really envy you, because in the absence of being there, you have to create some method of communication what you saw, and your ability with the written word is extraordinary, and I congratulate you on it. But just as I posed and challenged Niki, you've done all this fantastic work internationally. Do you think of any relevance that could be applied into more regional areas like Lancashire?
Absolutely. Wildfires are a problem here in Lancashire. So a lot of people in our community will remember the 2018 Winter Hill fire. That fire destroyed 18 square kilometres of moorland right next to Bolton. This is on our doorstep. My friend and I went for a walk on Winter Hill. It's a fellow writer friend of mine, and she said, okay, climate change, it's here. it has come home to affect us. So this is a very visible sign of what is happening right here. But the good news is that we can take methods that we know about locally, but also that we can learn from elsewhere, and we can apply them
Similar
here.
to Niki, isn't it? It's that whole...
Yeah, absolutely. So I was talking to an urban planning specialist at UCLA who was telling me that the issues with wildfire creep in on the fringes of Los Angeles, where you have beautiful, beautiful, beautiful homes up in the Santa Monica Mountains, areas like Topanga, very wealthy areas, and they were hit by the Palisades fire last year. So how do you go about doing planting even in people's gardens that prevents wildfire? It's amazing. If you plant a Californian live oak in your garden, it will catch the embers. And how we can think about transferring that knowledge to Lancashire would be, well, the urban fringes of housing areas in Lancashire, according to a recent report, are vulnerable to wildfire right here. But there are very simple ways we can go about protecting our moorlands. So people can have their barbecue in their back garden. It's much safer than taking your disposable barbecue up to the moorlands. I never knew that glass bottles created a fire risk because they can concentrate the sun's rays, I believe. So taking your glass bottles home, if you've had a cheeky beer, is one of the ways you can protect our moorlands. But people plant trees and they do wetland restoration up on the high moorlands, and that intersects beautifully with the work that colleagues are doing in river catchments. These are very, very simple ways that we can reduce the risk of wildfire.
I get the feeling that if I didn't call this to a halt, this could go on for the whole of the festival time. And I thank all three of you for bringing that passion for art, culture and creativity and arts into this arena. And I look forward to the day that we focus on this during the festival event. I have a health background, as you know, and it's becoming clear I can give up smoking and drinking and try and eat as much sugar-free food, but if I'm stressed and depressed about the environment I live in, I'm probably equally at risk. And I think that message is coming through increasingly. And it's thanks to the work that you guys are doing that's happening. So I'd like to thank you so much, all three of you, for joining us today and sharing your current work and ideas. Highlights from today during this particular day of the festival will include inaugural lectures from Nick Palfreman, who is our Professor of Sign Language and Deaf Studies, and we'll be announcing the winners of the RKE image competition later in the day, so you can all see the images on display currently or during the festival in the Student Centre. Can I thank all three of you for your contribution. Thank you very much.